In French, we call it hygiène de vie, life hygiene, which I like. You just do these things to keep the system functioning. You will be able to face difficult situations with more clarity and more strength and more confidence as well.
This is By Joyan Season 2. I'm your host, Joyan Chan, and every Wednesday we bring you inspiring stories, powerful message, and fun conversations with me and my special guests and friends, and it's my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. This podcast is for you if you're looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life. Now let's dive into today's episode and get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. Across different stages of her life, our guest today lost her parents and two brothers to sudden, devastating deaths, losses that shaped both her path and her understanding of grief. And she now draws on neuroscience, mindfulness, and mindful movement like Pilates to help others understand their grief and return to inner steadiness. Her work is recognized for being grounded, research-informed, and deeply human. So guys, help me in welcoming my new friend, Sylvia Wolfer. So welcome to the show and very good morning.
Hi, Joy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this upcoming conversation.
Yeah, me too. And I just love our pre-chat, about traveling, about, possibility of us meeting each other in real life. That's just really
Yes.
exciting. But yeah, and your story is just I would say heartbreaking, but also truly inspiring based on how you approach grief today and help others and guide others through. So I would love to hear, was there a moment when your personal grief shifted from something that you were dealing with, you were surviving, to something that you felt called to guide others through and became the work that you do today?
Well, yes, that's really a good question because there was indeed a moment that was quite life-changing. So just in a nutshell, my dad died when I was 7. And 10 years later, my younger brother died. And they both died very suddenly, like within a minute, So it was very shocking, very brutal. And I was 17 by then, and there was no support really. And so I navigated decades in my life just constantly bracing for grief and being completely at the mercy of grief. I was a victim, really. Grief was like a dictator in my life who would just rule everything. And I thought this is just how it is. I thought, well, when you lose the people you love the most, you're just triggered by random songs, by people, by places, by words. That's just how it is. You just burst out into tears or break down like anywhere, anytime. That's just what it is. That's what I thought. And then fast forwards a few years, a few decades, and my older brother died in an accident also suddenly within a minute. And that was just so, I don't even have words for it. When that happened, you felt like this can't be, this must be the wrong movie. This can't happen to the same family again. Like, I felt like, hang on, like I lost my dad and my brother. I cannot lose another brother so
Yeah.
brutally, too young, suddenly in a road crash. And that's when I suddenly got really angry on top of the pain of grief. That's when I got angry because I realized that I had lost so many precious moments. I could have been mindful with my older brother because I was triggered by grief and because of the unattended grief, because I had been a victim of previous grief for so long. And that's when I thought, okay, this has to change. This has to change. Grief will always be in my life. I accept it. I know that. But from now on, it will be in my own terms. I will be the boss. Grief will be here, but I will be the boss. And that was really a huge turning point in my life.
Right. So what did you do? Like, what really changed after you shifted your perspective? Like, what did you do about it?
Well, I started to dive into the science. My brother died just before lockdown. And so
Okay.
I entered lockdown. I was living in England at that time. I was completely on my own. I had my mom was in Bolivia, my younger brother was in France. So I was living alone, and lockdown was just very lonely. And so grieving alone really took its toll as well. And because the world seemed to crumble around me, like my whole family unit was just shrinking. The world was a place that was suddenly so estranged with COVID going on. I started diving into the science because in science, I found some kind of stability. I was just craving data, numbers, figures, research. just like really pragmatic things I could hold on to. And as I was reading more and more about the science during these endlessly long, lonely hours of COVID, I realized two things. One, it's that it was extremely interesting, and there had been research done over the past 10, 20 years that was super interesting about grief. And two, it kind of validated my experience, because seeing these numbers, these percentages, and of course they're average and we all have an individual experience, but it validated my experience in a sense that I could see clearly that I was not the only one experiencing these things. Because when you grieve, when you lose a loved one, when you lose a close family member, partner, so brutally, you think you're going mad. You feel like, am I losing it? Like, why am I still waiting for them? Why am I still wanting to call them? Why does it feel that I see them on the street? Like, you think you're losing it, you're going bonkers. So this was quite reassuring for me to discover that it was a shared experience.
Right. Okay, let's go back to before you dive into the science, and it helps you to overcome the grief. What does unattended grief look like? And how did you realize that you were living in it for years?
Yes, so it is actually surprisingly sometimes a physical experience first. You will feel it in your body first. So before a wave of grief hits, you're going to feel a tightness in the chest. You'll feel your heart rate rising. You might even feel heat in your body. Your breath gets shallow. So you have a physical response, and that can also be difficulty to sleep, digestive issues, and just bracing constantly, feeling that it can just hit you anywhere, anytime. So you're kind of on edge, you're tired but wired, and you might feel that you're functioning. So the people I work with, usually that's really the common trait. They're functioning, they show up for what needs to be done, and to the outside world, everything looks kind of fine. But inside, they can feel that something is not quite right, and they can just crumble anytime. And it's that perceived lack of control that can be really daunting, and just the body being on edge. So a tendency maybe even to have more colds than before, to not feel rested after a night's sleep, to withdraw from social interactions. It's all these subtle ways, that we kind of see as a norm that take over when grief is unattended. And what I would also like to say to the listeners, which I found helpful, is that grief is literally a wound, physically and mentally. It affects your body, your brain physiology, your body physiology, like a real injury would. And just like any injury, some injuries will heal on their own. That's just, how it is. Over time, they will heal on their own. But some wounds will not heal on their own. And when the wound doesn't heal, it doesn't just stay as it is. It festers. It gets worse. So anyone grieving and listening, if you've lost someone a few years ago, I would like you to ask yourself, how is this wound healing? Is it healing slowly over time? Am I, do I have more moments of joy? Do I find myself smiling more often? Or is it just not changing at all or getting worse? Because if it's not changing or getting worse, then they should definitely seek support.
So how do grief triggers work? Like, what is even a grief trigger? Like, how would you define it? And how do they show up?
Yeah. So a grief trigger. So anyone who has had a heartbreak will know. You're like driving, you're on your way to work, and suddenly there's a song coming up on the radio. And for me, for example, if my brother's favorite songs would come up in a public place, I could not control myself. It would just like come at me like a wave, and I would have difficulty to breathe. I would like feel completely deaf to the sounds around me. Like I was completely in my bubble, and I would have to get up and go away and just cry my eyes out for a few minutes. And sometimes I wouldn't even be able to come back. So they can be very brutal and violent, and in some very random places that are actually super triggering, like a supermarket. You could not imagine how much grocery shopping can be triggering because of all these products that might bring memories up, because of all these people. You see the ideal couple, or you see the ideal family, or you see kids, siblings playing around in the aisle. So grocery shopping can be super triggering. So it's basically a very strong emotion that overcomes you, and that feels like you can't control it. It's going to take over. It's like a wave or a bomb. It's quite brutal.
how about our habits or, our relationship with others? Maybe I lost touch wood, but perhaps I lost a loved one, but I'm still with my partner. How would it affect my relationship with others?
Yes, a
Right.
lot. Yeah, really. And I mean, my experience is really in the family because I lost both parents and two siblings. And so when that happened at a young age, I mean, no matter the age really, but it really changes the family constellation because everyone grieves in a different way. And so to give an example, when our younger brother died, so that was after our dad had passed. So my mom was a widow who just lost a child, and she was very loud in her grief. She would talk about him all the time. There was like a shrine in the house with dozens of pictures of him, all the flowers from his funeral, like pictures everywhere. And she was very loud. And for me, it was torturous to have all these pictures of him right in front of me, to hear about him all the time. And so I just couldn't stay in the room when she was talking about him and repeating the same thing over and over and over again to whoever was here to listen. And I felt very guilty for feeling that anger towards her because I thought, oh my God, she's just lost a child. And now I'm being like, I was 17, I'm just being, not understanding. So it can really change the situations in the dynamics of relationships. So what is important is to really communicate a lot and to be very tolerant, to really accept that there's no hierarchy in grief. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. And we all have our ways, and every way of grieving is welcome. Yeah, but because the emotions are really heightened, it can become very difficult, and arguments can come up, fights, and we might end up saying things we didn't want to say. So relationships can be really at risk. It's very tender. Grief is a very tender emotion, and everyone, even though it's a universal experience, everyone will experience grief somehow. It's also very individual because we will all have our own story with the person who passed, and our own memories and our own interactions and expectations from what that relationship could have been. So yeah, it's like if anyone listening is in that situation where they find that the dynamics of whatever their relationship is with other people around them is shifting, it's important to address it, because otherwise there's like another layer of grief on top. You lose a loved one, and then you lose the relationships that felt stable around you as well. It's a very complex experience, and it's really important that we have these conversations. I'm grateful, that you have me on your podcast today, because in the Western world, we don't talk about it enough. It's quite taboo. So when it happens, everyone is lost. The person who is hit by the loss and the people who are around that person, everyone is completely lost and doesn't know how to act, and it can lead to a lot of unnecessary suffering.
So why do you think it's so important as part of healing to talk about it instead of avoiding it? Why is it so important to talk about it?
Well, to normalize the conversation, because I find a lot of solace in shared humanity. So just to understand that other people go through the same type of experience can be very helpful. Grief feels super isolating. When you lose a loved one, you feel very lonely in your experience. The whole world changes. Your world stops. Everything else seems to be going on. And to realize that actually most people have experienced that. We don't necessarily talk about it, but if you're in a room of 20 people and you look around, well, more than half of them will have experienced that. So I find that talking about it takes the stigma away. It normalizes the conversation and the experience. I found, especially, like I said, diving into the science, I found it very soothing to feel close to humankind in my experience of grief, and also to give hope. I think this is really important, because when you're hit by grief, my experience is sudden losses, so it's very brutal. It's not harder or less hard than someone who's had a terminal illness. There's no hierarchy, but it's very brutal, and it takes time for the brain to recalibrate. And yeah, it's just, I think talking about it makes it a bit less scary and brings hope, because when it does happen, you feel you're in a deep hole and it feels like it will never get better. You almost don't want it to get better. You feel like you just want to be sad and cry and suffer for the rest of your life. So having people share their experience is kind of soothing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some of the simple grounded tools that you teach now, like awareness or mindfulness or even Pilates, that can help someone process their grief safely?
Yeah. So what I would always recommend, and it does sometimes come as a surprise, but is to tend to the body. When emotions are too overwhelming, it's very difficult to think clearly, and we cannot really think ourselves to feeling better. But we can certainly use the body, and the mind and the body are very much linked. And when the body is looked after, then we can tend to the emotions a bit better. There's like a feedback loop that can really spiral in grief and in any challenge in life, really, because it will impact your sleep, in particular your REM sleep. But when your REM sleep is impacted, it's harder to manage emotions, difficult emotions. So you can see how this will and then the higher your difficult emotions, the lesser you will be able to sleep well. So it's kind of a feedback loop. Appetite is very much disrupted. So it's very easy to neglect proper nutrition when you're in the midst of grief. So what I recommend is always to tend to the body first. There's a wonderful scientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett. She specialized in emotions and she talks about body budget. I love that. She says that we have a body budget, and when our body budget is low or impacted, it will have an effect on our emotions. And it's very simple to understand. If we haven't had a good night's sleep or if we are in pain, it's much harder to be upbeat and joyful and happy and content and optimistic because our
Mhm.
body budget is impacted. And sometimes we might feel low, a bit sad, a bit off, but actually what happens is that we're dehydrated, or again, we didn't have enough sleep, or the body isn't fueled properly. And that will impact our emotions. We don't think about it, but when you give these examples, people realize that, oh, hang on, yeah, that's true. Or when we feel ill, we're just not as upbeat. So if our body is looked after, it will not heal grief, but it will certainly take off the edge a little bit, of these sharp emotions. And then you can tend to the emotions a bit more intentionally. But ways to tend to the body, because everything feels overwhelming when you grieve. It doesn't have to be like a whole protocol, or you don't need to go and see a functional doctor. Just do basics. What I did, and it's really from personal experience, when I felt so lost and unwell, and I just didn't know how to help myself anymore. And bear in mind, I've been a Pilates instructor for many years. I've been meditating daily for many years. So I thought that I was quite in a good position in the first place. But even so, I was lost and I could feel my body just collapsing, my nervous system collapsing. So what I decided then, it came out of really despair, because I just felt like I can't do this anymore. I started to do 5 things every day, day in, day out. It was very simple, watching my hydration, my nutrition, and not big meal, but just like proper meals, like real food, getting daylight every morning, because that will then reset my circadian rhythm, which will help with my appetite regulation and help with my sleep patterns. Move, whatever that means. And that could just be breathing, some days, deep breathing, or walk outside, or a gentle stretch, or a run, or training. Um, Surround myself with good people, and then mindfulness, but not necessarily sitting in silence with my eyes closed, but just trying to notice things, holding my warm cup of coffee and looking outside at the birds, just that, just appreciating these moments. So very, very simple things to tend to the body, to signal safety to the body, because when we are grieving, grief is experienced as a huge threat to our whole system. So the fight or flight response is very much activated. So what we try to do through these behaviors is to really signal safety to the body so that it gently learns to shift again into the rest and digest mode, or to activate the parasympathetic mode, because then whatever we do to help our emotions will be a little bit more efficient.
I mean, thanks for sharing. Those are really, I would say, useful tools. If you were to look back at the version of you who was bracing for impact after those losses, what do you think she needed most that now informs the work that you do today?
Hope. Hope. Yeah, hope that it would get better, and the knowledge that it will not change overnight, but if you do the right things over and over and over again, it will get better. And then comes a time where you learn to live with grief, because it will never disappear. But all these little actions, intentional actions daily, they are a little bit like the gym. If you want to get fit and strong, and you go to the gym one day, you're not going to see a difference. 2 days, 3 days, you won't see a difference. Even 3 weeks, you're not going to see a difference. But you're going to have to trust the process, that if you keep doing the exact same thing over a few months and a few years, the change will be dramatic and you will really benefit from it. And I don't just think, I actually really believe it's true. But all these skills that I've learned from grief and that I'm sharing with the people I work with, they apply to anything in life, whatever challenging situation, because there will always be a challenge in life. There are periods, we know it, life is a roller coaster, and grief is an extremely stressful situation, but we always have stressful situations, maybe moving house, changing jobs, becoming a parent, graduating. Like, all these things are milestones in a lifetime, and they can be very demanding on the nervous system. So these tools are just applicable to anything. And if we start off getting that lifestyle, in French we call it hygiène de vie, life hygiene, which I like. You just do these things to keep the system functioning. You will be able to face difficult situations with more clarity and more strength and more confidence as well.
Yeah, I like that because yeah, you are right. Because challenges we do face them every day. And you are now in. I would love to talk about traveling now as part of your story. Based on our previous conversation, it's a way for you to detach from everything that you own. So when did you decide that you want to move overseas? And just leave everything behind. I don't know whether that's your intention, but yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so from a very young age, I've always wanted to travel. So I've had a tendency to move countries every couple of years. And then I spent much longer in England because of COVID, and I really enjoyed living in England, to be fair. But then my brother died, and then a few years later, my mom died, and I was really emotionally unwell. I felt broken, and I felt like something has to change, but I didn't quite know what. And I meditate a lot, and I get a lot of answers in my meditations. And so one day it just came to me to let go of all my material belongings, and to just have a suitcase, to fit everything in a suitcase and go to Sri Lanka, which came to me in a meditation. And I know it sounds weird, but it came to me in a meditation after months of not knowing what to do. I felt like something had to change, but I thought, I don't just want to run away from a situation, because that's not the solution. And then that day it came to me, and I remember going for a walk by the Thames, by the River Thames where I lived. And
Mhm.
it was a beautiful sunny day, and it was just an evidence. I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And so I started organizing myself. And I say that laughing because, as the days got closer, I was starting to freak out. I was like, oh my goodness, my flat is getting emptier and emptier. Like, literally, I'm selling everything. I was selling and giving away to charities. And then I ended up being in that completely empty flat with a one-way ticket to Sri Lanka. And I thought, what am I doing? But there was also a little voice in me telling me that's the right thing. And so, yeah, that's been the case now for 2 years, where I've just let go of all my belongings. And it's been very, very freeing to not own anything. And I also believe it's somehow linked to my experience of grief, because, healing doesn't mean that we have it all figured out, or we still have our wounds, not our wounds but our scars. We're still scarred. So our limp, there's a beautiful quote by Christopher Walken where he says, losing a loved one is like badly breaking an ankle and you never fully recover. So you limp, but you still dance with your limp, and it's your own dance. And so I feel like this is my limping through life, to just not attach too much to places and things, because then I reduce the risk of losing things, and funnily enough, and this is really a coincidence because it was not a conscious choice, but I've just spent 2 years in Sri Lanka and now I am in Cambodia, and they both happen to be Buddhist countries. And one of the most important principles is impermanence and detachment,
Yeah.
that everything changes, everything is ever changing, nothing ever remains the same. And holding on to things is what causes suffering. So it's been quite a spiritual journey as well to be in these countries. Before I left for Sri Lanka, is that I had walked through the storm. I felt like a wounded animal, but I felt like the battle was over. And now was time to retreat in a cave and lick my wounds and heal my wounds. And that's how it felt to come to Sri Lanka. And this feeling was very reassuring and empowering because I felt broken, but I felt like very hopeful. I felt like now is time to heal. Now I'm going to do that. And because I was in a country where I didn't know anyone, a country that I had never been to before, I was very alone. There was a lot of solitude for quite a few months before I started meeting people. But purposeful, and intentional solitude. I wanted to be alone. And there was so much solace. There was so much grace in that solitude. It just felt so good. When you have a bad wound, but someone puts dressing on it and you can just feel how this is healing and how this is good. So that was quite life-changing, to dare to follow that what seemed completely irrational idea of just selling everything and moving to the other side of the world. And that feeling of, now I can look after myself. Now I'm just going to heal. And that's what I did. And it felt amazing. The process felt amazing.
So how does someone, or how do we know that we're truly healing versus we are still surviving, we are still avoiding it, or we are running away? Because sometimes, in the past, I ran away because, every time when I face a challenge or a difficulty, I wanted to travel, I want to go somewhere, right? And I know that was my coping mechanism. So how do we know that we are actually avoiding, or, it's just part of coping mechanism to run away from it?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's not always a clear line, I think. So again, I can only talk from my personal experience, but I find that when you start noticing that the moments of joy, of warmth, of serenity are just becoming more and more and more. And sometimes it's hard to notice. So I would have a journal, where I would write down, because sometimes it feels like you're constantly in pain or you're constantly unwell. But when you start to write down or to notice for yourself, today I've laughed a few times. Today, this was a really nice experience. I was really in the moment. I really enjoyed what just happened. The more you notice these things, the more you're starting to heal. The more you notice the people around you, the more you find joy, or if you find yourself laughing at a silly movie. These are all little signs that you're healing if they happen more often over time.
So yeah, I forgot to ask. So in the moment when grief triggered, right? When we were triggered by, when we saw a picture, when you hear a song, and we are instantly in that overwhelming or unpredictable sadness. What should we do in that very moment?
Yeah, I love that question, because you know what? I have developed my own little coping mechanism, and I've been doing 20 podcasts over the last 2 months.
Wow.
And so people would ask me that question. And every time I mentioned it, or even with clients, I do that with clients a lot. And people are very surprised when I say, well, how about you try this? Because it seems, it is surprising and it seems counterintuitive, but it has worked for me and for many people I know. So when a grief wave is about to hit, the griever will know. We are so familiar with these waves. We can feel them coming. It's like a volcano before the eruption. You feel it's brewing. It's brewing. So when that happens to me now, I say to my wave of grief, I can see you. I hear you. I understand you want to come, but not now. This is not the right time. I don't have time for you now. But, and that is really the critical point, that's super important, you have to really make time to process and to allow that wave of grief in. So what I will do, so this sounds super pragmatic, but that's what's helped me, I will make an appointment with myself. I will push that grief wave away, but then I will make an appointment with myself, let's say, I don't know, Thursday night after work at 8 p.m. I'm going to be on my own, put the sad music on, put the candles out, look at pictures, videos, allow all the emotions. I welcome them all to go through me. I will cry, I will laugh, and it's not comfortable. It is scary, when you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to let this painful wave go through me. But there is something so empowering and so cathartic in doing that. Because again, it's a bit like the gym analogy earlier. It's not going to change overnight. You're not going to be able to manage that grief wave the first time. But if you keep doing it, you train your brain to understand that you have the agency, and then you do it in your own term. And so grief will always be part of our life. We don't even want it to go, to be fair. When we lose a loved one, there's something bittersweet about that sadness we feel for them. But you want to give it a place, a proper place. And now I feel like I let grief in my own terms. I'm the boss. Grief is here, but it's not controlling me. And so it was really over and over and over to say, no, I see you, but not now. Now is not the right time. But again, I really insist on that. Do not do that and then not tend to it, because that backfires. Then it hits you out of nowhere and like 10 times worse. So really make time. Yeah. So I would like to really share my personal experience. I would do like paint. I would just sit down and paint, put the music on, and then I would have like imaginary conversations with my brother and just like cry and let it all out and pass through me.
Yeah, you're right. It's important not to push away or accumulate the grief and sadness and just come all at once. Are there stages of grieving? Like, what do we have to go through, in order to heal eventually?
Yes, so there is a very well-known idea of these 5 stages of grief that were defined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. But these 5 stages of grief are actually not what we think they are, because her work originally was not about people who were grieving, but it was about people who had a terminal illness and who were dying. So these were the 5 stages that she found for people who were dying. And back then when she did it, I think it was end of the 60s or 70s, the way studies were done were not quite the same as nowadays. So in a nutshell, these 5 stages of grief are not necessarily accurate. So some people will experience them, but also many people will not experience these 5 stages of grief. And those who experience them, they might have them in a completely different order. They might have them all, on the same day. So I think they might have done more bad than good, that idea at least of these 5 stages of grief, because it might have made some people feel that they were grieving wrongly, they were not doing it the right way, or one of the stages was missing. Or so if anyone listening is trying to understand or capture these 5 stages of grief, I don't attach too much to these 5 stages of grief. Just allow your experience to be what it is. Welcome it. Again, there is no right way, no wrong way to grieve. All emotions are welcome, and not just for the grievers. Anyone listening, all emotions are welcome, even the uncomfortable ones, even the ones that we might be ashamed of. They are here to give us information, to teach us something, to say something. So we should never push them away. Just accept them, let them in, and remember that these emotions will fade away again. They come and go in waves. That's just what emotions do. But yes, again, so the 5 stages of grief, they're not scientifically, rigorously accurate. So if you don't find yourself going through them, don't worry. There's one maybe that I can talk about, which is called denial. And this is something that I know personally I've suffered from, because it was labeled as that stage where people say, oh yeah, you're in denial. But when someone says to you, you're in denial, you feel like, they could as well say you're an idiot, you're an idiot. There's a reality and you don't get the reality. And it's so upsetting, I find, And so, but there is indeed, you find yourself when you lose a loved one, you find your brain looking for them, you find yourself wanting to call them. You find yourself expecting them to walk through the door. So you feel like, am I in denial? Am I an idiot? Am I going crazy? So actually, there has been amazing research done on this, on the brain in grief. And one of these researchers, Mary Frances O'Connor, she's written 2 books. They're incredibly helpful, I find. And the first one was called The Grieving Brain. And she explains that for every relationship that we have in life, our brain has a map, a 3-dimensional map, which is space, time, and connection. So if I ask you about your sister, if I ask you, where is your sister now? You're very likely to tell me where she is. When are you roughly going to see her again? You will know when you're going to see her again, roughly. What is your connection? You know how close you are to your sister. So this is a map the brain develops, and this is how we navigate the world. And the people that are important in our life, they are part of our, they are just part of our whole system. So when someone dies, suddenly that map has a glitch, because this map is deeply ingrained and it takes a long time for the brain to recalibrate. So that notion of time and space is still very vivid. So it will take a long time for the brain to understand that the people we love who are gone are not here in the space and in the time we used to have them. And even though there's part of our brain that knows, I know they're gone, I know I'm not going to see them again, there is that mismatch with that map in the brain. And this is what causes the grief triggers, because there's like, for a fraction of a second, you're like, oh, I'm going to call them. They're going to, I have that so often with my brother. Oh, I'm going to tell him this. He's going to find it really funny. He's going to laugh. And then that suddenly the realization that, oh, but hang on, he's not here anymore. And that's because of that map in the brain. So it's not that we're crazy, just that it takes time. And over time, the brain will recalibrate and learn that. But it takes lived experience. We learn better through lived experience. So if you take the example of someone who's lost their spouse, they know their spouse is gone, but it's going to take a lot of mornings waking up without them for the brain to understand that this is what reality will be like, So that, just to talk about denial, because I found it a bit upsetting to be told I was in denial when I had the feeling that I really understood very well that, my brothers were dead and my dad was dead. And
Thanks for sharing. Since you mentioned about, like the urge of wanting to call someone, to text them, to tell them something, because I know on social media, I've seen people who talk about grief and, share their experience, and also having the urge to tell their dad or mom something, that happened today. And they actually send the text, they actually call them. From your, based on your research, as the expert, would you say it helps with the whole grieving process, the journey, to actually send the text, to really call them and just say out loud whatever you want to tell them? Like, would it help, or rather is not helping?
yeah, this is a meaningful question. And I would just say that this is a very personal experience. And in psychology, it's called continuing bonds, where when the person is gone, some people will keep talking to them a lot, or like you say, really have like a relationship. And in the past, this was seen as a detrimental coping mechanism, but nowadays, thanks to studies that have been done, we know that it is actually a helpful coping mechanism for some people. And it's beautiful to have these continuing bonds where you have your rituals, where you have, like, I have a lot of imaginary conversations with my older brother, but not with my dad, So it's, I think every experience is really very personal and individual. And this is important for people who grieve to understand that there is nothing wrong with them for having their own experience. It's just to watch the suffering again, and to see grief as a wound, and to see that, does that help? Does
Right.
that soothe the pain, or does it just make it worse? In which case, there might be something to shift or seek help.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks for everything. This conversation is just so grounding, I would say. And is there anything else that you really want to talk about? Perhaps I didn't ask you or didn't let you.
Yes, so I've said it in the podcast already, but I think it's often overlooked and neglected, and it's so, so, so important. Your body is your home. Your body is your home. And if you look after your body, you will help your heart, you will help your soul, you will help your emotions. So when everything seems overwhelming, if you don't know where to start, if you don't know what to do to help yourself, look after your body and you will do yourself a big favor.
Yeah, I love that reminder. Now tell my people where they can connect with you if they need some help or support. Where should I send them?
Thank you for asking. So it's very simple. It's my name, Sylvia Wolfer, SylviaWolfer.com. That's my website. And all the information about my work is there. And there are also a lot of free resources, a lot of articles and free guided meditations and just general information about grief.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Guys, I'll put all her links in the show note below. Make sure you visit our website, download the resources, free guides, meditation. Just reach out to Sylvia if you need personalized support or one-on-one support. You don't have to suffer alone. And it doesn't hold all the power. And if this episode resonated with you, I hope it reminds you that you are not alone. Like we all go through it. And that healing doesn't mean forgetting. At least this is what I learned from Silva today. It means learning how to carry the love and the loss with more agency, more mindfulness, and more softness. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you again for tuning into Find Joy Joyan podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag findjoyjoyan_podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.